I planned the most elegant graduation party a mother could give, only to watch my son stand up and sever ties with me in front of everyone. Then he turned and offered his blessing to my husband and his mistress. They thought I'd do what I always did, swallow it quietly and clean up their mess. But this time they were wrong. If Leo no longer wants me as his mother, then I see no reason to keep paying his tuition, covering his father's medical bills, or letting them live in the house I paid for. I'll be taking it all back. I spent 2 solid weeks preparing for my son Leo's high school graduation party. Every little detail, centerpieces, music, catering, I handled myself because I wanted that night to be unforgettable. He was valedictorian. He had an early admission letter from Harvard in his hand. How many moments like that does a person get in life? As his mother, I wanted to give him a proper send-off, a celebration that marked the end of his youth in the best possible way. What I didn't realize then was that I was rehearsing for one of the most ironic moments of my life. I stood in the second row, just behind a row of rose columns, watching Leo walk up to the stage after the MC called his name. He wore the navy suit I had custom-made for him, stitched to perfection. "Look at him," I whispered to Diana, my closest friend and Leo's unofficial second aunt. "He looks like a grown man now." Diana smiled softly. "He should be proud of you, Jane." I smiled too but didn't say what I was thinking. "I hope so too." Then Leo spoke. "I have 2 announcements to make tonight," he said loud and clear. The microphone made his voice crisper than usual, almost unnaturally sharp. I assumed he was about to thank us, his parents. At the very least, I thought he'd acknowledge the years of work I put into building his future. But what came next felt like a slap across the face. First, I've decided to cut ties with Jane. She's no longer my mother. The room, filled with quiet conversations and soft jazz music, froze. Even with champagne flutes in hand and smiles half-formed, no one knew how to react. I stood there in silence, the whole world suddenly on mute. Leo didn't pause. His voice was steady, rehearsed, like he was reading a prepared statement. "Second, I'd like to offer my full support for my father and Ms. Martha's relationship. I hope our friends and family can accept and bless their future together." My ears began to ring. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from guests nearby, the clink of glass against glass, the echo of my heart falling into a deep, hollow place. Martha stood beside my husband, Greg. Her eyes were red, her hands twisted nervously in front of her. She bit her lip and looked down, playing the victim like she'd just been blindsided. "Greg?" He stood there silent. No denial. No explanation. Just a light pat on Martha's back. A quiet endorsement of everything Leo had just said. Then Martha let out a dramatic sob, turned and fled the room, covering her mouth as if she had just been humiliated. Greg followed closely behind like the gentleman in a cheap romance novel. I couldn't breathe. My knees buckled. Diana caught me by the arm just in time. I tried to speak but my throat locked up. Leo looked straight at me, his expression cold, victorious. His words sliced through the air like a final verdict. "You should just live with your money, Jane. People like you don't deserve families." I gripped the nearest chair, my fingertips numb. In a matter of minutes, I'd lost a son, a husband, and everything I thought I'd built. Years of sacrifice gone with a sentence. Behind me, Diana's voice rang out like a battle cry. "You little bastard." She stepped in front of me like a lioness, shielding me from view, her voice rising with fury. "What the hell is wrong with you, Leo? That's your mother up there. Everything you wear, everything you've eaten, every single lesson and opportunity, you got it because she broke her back for you. Do you have any idea what that means?" Leo slapped the table, unfazed. "No one asked her to do that. She did it for herself. A real mom stays home, builds a family, not someone always working, always out acting like she's saving the world. Martha held this family together, not her. I didn't even know how it got to this point. I remember holding him through fevers, racing to the ER in the dead of night. I remember writing his first speech in elementary school. I remember juggling clients and calling in every favor I had to find the right tutor when he started middle school. But he doesn't remember any of that. He erased it all. That night, I didn't say another word. I let Diana lead me out of the hall I had spent weeks decorating, every flower and fabric hand-picked with love. Behind me were whispers, Greg's silence, the housekeeper slipping away quietly like she didn't want to be part of the fallout. I know this didn't start that night, but it ended that night. It was the final straw. From that moment on, I stopped trying to prove I could be the kind of mother they demanded. I realized some families stop being home a long time ago. And some children leave their hearts behind the moment you start breaking yours for them. There are stretches in life you survive on nothing but grit. Mine began when Leo was 2 years old, and it didn't let up for over a decade. I clawed my way through those years, and by the time I could finally breathe, I had barely scraped together a life that looked like success. Back then, Greg was working as a project manager at a small local construction firm. He worked hard, but we were always behind. And Leo, who had just turned 2, was in that clingy toddler phase. As for me, I was pushing a food cart up and down Massachusetts Avenue, delivering hot lunches to office buildings. The cart was a joint venture with Diana, my best friend. We'd started it from scratch, and the early days were brutal. We prepped in a friend's garage, woke up at 4 a.m., and spent entire days selling food on street corners in the biting cold. After the lunch rush, I'd race home, clean up, bathe Leo, get him to bed, and then dive into accounting, inventory, and prepping for the next day. I was a machine. No pause button, no backup. And none of it was seen. None of it was appreciated. Not even by Leo. He remembers the company I eventually built. He doesn't remember the part where I had to scrape together daycare fees by wearing discount work boots and hauling vats of soup through a snowstorm. But eventually the food cart took off. We landed supply contracts with a few tech campuses and finally didn't have to be on-site ourselves. I registered the business, built a brand, hired our first employees. For the first time, I could actually spend a full holiday with Leo. But life has a way of sucker punching you just when you're starting to stand upright. Greg had a fall at a job site. The injury left him with permanent nerve damage. Overnight, he went from being our family's provider to someone who needed round-the-clock care. And Leo was only 7. I had a choice to make. Shut everything down and become a full-time caregiver, or double down and become the kind of woman who could truly carry the future on her own. I chose the latter. So I started leaving the house at 6 a.m. and getting home after 9 p.m., 6 days a week. Most of the time, I relied on security cameras to check if Leo had finished his homework, if Greg had taken his meds, if someone remembered to shut off the dryer. That period felt like living with my heart soaked in vinegar, sour, anxious, and constantly stinging. But I couldn't afford to break. 5 years ago, Greg's doctors recommended hiring a live-in caregiver. I was burning out. My stomach had started bleeding from the stress. A client of mine referred someone she trusted. A private assistant with a nursing background. Her name was Martha. She showed up polished, soft-spoken, well-mannered. Leo took to her immediately. "She's great," Greg said after the first day. "Really attentive. Sweet too." And that night, for the first time in years, I exhaled. It felt like someone had finally lifted a weight off our chest. What I didn't realize then was that in catching my breath, I'd opened the door too wide. Martha's role expanded from daily caregiving to something more intimate. At first, it was little things. She'd light scented candles in the living room. She taped a dinner menu plan to the fridge. Then I started hearing strange comments from Leo. "Are you going out of town again? Why don't you ever have time? Martha's just warmer." The real punch to the gut came when I was flipping through an old ledger and found one of Leo's old sketchbooks. In it was a drawing of a family, 3 people. Greg, Leo, and Martha. Not me. I closed the book quietly and slid it back on the shelf. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself he was just a kid. That when he grew up he'd understand. That Greg was just lonely and needed someone to talk to. But now I know. Some cracks once opened only keep spreading. By the time I realized Martha wasn't just a temporary caregiver, she'd been living in our house for 3 years, working for us for 5, and she and Greg had developed a quiet understanding. Leo treated her like a second mother. Or maybe his only one. Me. The woman who built this house, held it together, paid every bill, every debt. I'd become the outsider. The cold one. The one who didn't get it. They never said it aloud. But I could feel it. When I came home late from work, Leo no longer ran into my arms. He'd just sit at the counter eating one of Martha's desserts and say flatly, "Did you eat yet?" Eventually I became afraid to come home. Afraid of walking into the house I'd built from nothing, only to find it warm and buzzing. But not for me. Like I was a guest in someone else's home. Uninvited. I kept thinking I could fix it. That I just needed more time. More effort. That one day Leo would see the truth. But when he stood on that stage and said, I no longer considered Jane my mother. I finally understood. Some distances can't be crossed, no matter how hard you try. The next morning I woke up even earlier than usual. The moment my eyes opened, last night's scene played on a loop in my head. Leo on stage, his two sentences magnified, repeated, crushed into my chest like wet cement. I couldn't breathe past it. Diana showed up early. She didn't say much. Just sat at the kitchen bar, sipping the herbal tea I made for her, keeping me company in silence. I wiped down the table again and again, as if scrubbing it clean could somehow erase the shame from the night before. I think I want to try one more time, I finally said. She looked at me, calm but firm. Just remember, dear, whatever happens, you owe him nothing but your truth. I nodded, then got in my car and drove to their apartment, the one in my name. I'd bought it for Leo to live in before college. Now it housed the three of them like some makeshift home. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard Martha in the kitchen frying eggs. Greg sat at the table watching TV. Leo was on a bar stool in pajamas, chewing on toast. No one stood up. No one said hello. Leo, I said as evenly as I could, can I talk to you alone? He didn't look up. Just kept chewing. Whatever you want to say it here. I swallowed the tightness in my throat and lowered my voice. I know I missed a lot while you were growing up. I was always working when you probably needed me most. But that wasn't because I didn't care. He looked up briefly, his eyes cold. Are you trying to make me feel guilty now? I shook my head. No. I just want you to know, I'm willing to change. I can step back from the company, spend more time with you and your dad. We're still a family. Leo let out a dry, humorless laugh and dropped his toast. A family? Didn't you get the message last night? I turned toward Martha. She didn't miss a beat, still flipping eggs like nothing was happening. But I saw the tiny smirk curling at the edge of her lips, smug, satisfied. Leo, I'm not blaming you, I said. I just want you to see that someone slowly pulled you away from me when I wasn't around. And that doesn't mean you ever really knew who I was. Greg slammed the remote onto the table. His voice was sharp. What are you implying? Martha's got more sense than you ever had. At least she doesn't treat her family like a quarterly business plan. I stared at him. You know what I went through out there. I kept this house running, paid for your therapy, Leo's tuition. All of it. You can hate that I wasn't here, but don't pretend I didn't sacrifice everything for this family. Greg shrugged. You chose to be a workaholic. Doesn't mean we owe you applause. That hit like a blade straight to the chest. And that's when Martha finally spoke, her voice gentle like poison wrapped in silk. Jane, I think you're exhausted. You need rest. Greg and I will take care of the home now. She paused, then added with a syrupy softness that cut deeper than anything. Maybe it's time to let go. That's when I saw it clearly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't about hurt feelings or time lost. This was a quiet, calculated takeover. Martha had taken the house, taken Leo's affection, and now, she wanted the power I'd spent my life building. I laughed. Then I cried, but it wasn't sadness. It was the kind of laugh that comes when the absurdity of betrayal finally becomes clear. What you really want, I said, is a docile woman who shuts up, smiles, and doesn't ask where the money's going. That's the kind of mother you're looking for, right? Leo stood up. What do you want now? Another dramatic speech? You never wanted to be my mom. Now it's too late to start pretending. I looked at him, and all the words I'd planned dissolved into silence. I said quietly, all right. If I'm no longer your mother, then don't spend another dime of my money. That got his attention. He froze, confused. The shock flickered across his face. What do you mean? I mean this apartment will be repossessed. Your allowance, your credit cards, your college fund, I'll be freezing all of it. Greg's rehab center? I'll call and cancel. You all said Martha could hold this family together. Great, let's see her do it. Martha's face drained of color. She took a step forward. Jane, come on. This isn't necessary. I raised my hand. Drop the act. That scene you pulled leaving the banquet last night? Nice performance. But I saw through it. You want to be this house's new queen? Then it's time you started paying the mortgage. Leo's eyes flicked toward her, really looked at her for the first time. And Greg? He just scoffed and turned his head away. I stepped toward the door and looked back one last time at the place I'd bought to shelter my son and care for my husband. I'm not your ATM. And I'm sure as hell not your fool. I don't owe you anything anymore. The door opened behind me. Silence followed. And then I heard it, Leo's voice, soft, uncertain. Mom. It wasn't loud. More instinct than intention. But I didn't look back. Because in that moment I understood. Sometimes it's not that you didn't try hard enough. Sometimes the script was never meant to include you. And I was done auditioning. When I walked out of that apartment, my head was spinning, but my body felt startlingly clear. The wind was sharp, whipping the hem of my dress as I reached the car. My fingers hovered over the unlock button for a moment before pressing it down in one decisive motion. And in that moment I realized, I wasn't broken. I was awake. When I got home, the first thing I did was call my financial advisor. I asked her to freeze every account connected to Leo and Greg. Their credit cards, living expenses, shared bills, even Leo's college fund. She paused on the line. Jane, are you sure about this? I've never been more sure, I replied. Next I called the rehab center. I canceled Greg's upcoming appointments and instructed the billing office to send all future invoices directly to him. That evening I stood in my kitchen and made myself a pot of beef bone broth. My favorite. It had been a long time since I did something just for me. The next day I went into the office. My desk was spotless, the light falling across the hardwood floors like a soft curtain. It was so quiet it felt like I was separated from the rest of the world. I called in my legal director and business partner. We began the formal process of restructuring ownership and removing any family access to company assets. I no longer want any family members involved, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it left no room for negotiation. Then I called my family attorney. I'm ready to start divorce proceedings. As soon as possible. She hesitated. Jane, are you absolutely sure this is the path you want? I glanced down at the copy of our marriage certificate on my desk and said quietly, I've been sure for a long time. I just finally stopped second-guessing myself today. I stayed at work until late that night. When I finally closed my laptop, I sat by the window and watched the lights flicker on across the city. The car lights along Massachusetts Avenue moved like a river. Far off in the harbor, a lighthouse blinked steadily. And for the first time in years, a sense of calm began to drift from my shoulders to my chest. I knew I needed to leave that house. Not because I no longer belonged, but because it had never truly welcomed me. The following morning I packed a small suitcase and my laptop, then drove north to a little apartment I'd bought years ago, thinking it might be my retreat when I retired. It wasn't big, but it was quiet, and when I opened the windows I could see the ocean. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't leave a note. I didn't glance back at the house I had traded 15 years of my life to afford, even though I was about to put it on the market. There was nothing left there for me to take. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't check my phone. I just sat on the balcony letting the sun warm my face. Below, kids zipped by on skateboards. The wind rattled through the eaves. For the first time in forever I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not freedom. Not happiness. But stillness. Like someone who'd finally stopped running while dragging a weight behind her. I spent the rest of the day sorting through old files. I deleted the synced photo albums from Leo's childhood. I removed Greg's name from my contact list. I submitted a request to my bank to update the beneficiary on my accounts. And I booked a meeting with my estate attorney to revise the trust. After I cut them off, I didn't reach out. But news still found me. The first call came from my property manager. Ms. Thompson, the townhouse on Parkside Lane has been officially reclaimed. Keys returned. Previous occupants cleared out. Any trouble? Nothing major, he said. Though one of the female tenants seemed a little distressed. But it's all handled now. They moved out 2 days ago. I hung up without a flicker of emotion. It felt less like reclaiming a property, and more like finally evicting a squatter from my peace. When Diana dropped by, she brought a special gift. A printed photo of Martha in a supermarket uniform, pushing a restocking cart. Greg was slouched by the register, bracing his bad leg, looking sallow. They look like a deleted scene from a bad TV drama, Diana chuckled, sipping her coffee. Martha's tagging discount stickers. Greg's pushing carts. Still think they're in the mood for romance. I didn't respond. Just gave a faint smile. Because karma never needed my help. It always arrives on schedule. Word is they're renting an old duplex out in the suburbs now. Dry grass covering the yard. Faulty heating in the winter. After I froze Leo's college fund, his financial aid application hit a wall due to Greg's undeclared income. The scholarship he was banking on didn't come through. His grades plummeted. And now, even his admission status is in jeopardy. When Diana told me, I scratched a line across my notepad with the pen in my hand. He didn't even show up for the state math competition, she said. Last year you hired a Stanford grad to coach him. I nodded. I'm not gloating, Jane, she added, her tone softening. But he needed to fall like this. He needed to learn. Without your home, he can't stand on his own. That afternoon, I booked a massage and signed up for a facial at a nearby spa. When I leaned back into the chair and closed my eyes, the only sound was the soft hum of a violin playing in the distance and the gentle mist of aromatherapy. It was the first time in years I'd stopped everything, work, motherhood, marriage, to just exist for myself. As I was changing to leave, my phone buzzed. Greg. I didn't answer. 3 minutes later, an email landed in my inbox. Sender, Greg. Subject, negotiation. I opened it. It was a rambling letter, poorly structured and clearly rewritten a dozen times. The first few paragraphs leaned on old sentiments. We were once husband and wife. Leo needs stability. The middle shifted to guilt-tripping. You're still the financial backbone of this family. And the last line finally showed its true face. $10,000 a month. Paid in installments. For Leo's living expenses and my continued rehabilitation. I let out a short laugh and hit forward, sending it to my attorney with a subject line that simply read, "Please draft a formal response." The next day, I had my assistant schedule a meeting with Greg at the coffee shop downstairs from my office. I didn't want him anywhere near my actual workspace. That place was clean, unstained, and he didn't deserve to contaminate it. He showed up in an old pilled wool coat, face pale and drawn, hair unkempt. The moment he sat down, he gave a shallow cough and tried to sound pitiful. Leo hasn't been doing well. And Martha's under a lot of pressure. I didn't move. Just stared at him. He gave a dry chuckle, then cut to the chase. You know Leo's still in school even if he's legally an adult. You can't seriously expect me to believe you're just cutting him off. Didn't he make that perfectly clear last week? That I'm no longer his mother? That you three are the real family now? Greg opened his mouth then closed it. For once he had no comeback. I continued, let's be honest. You're not here for Leo. You're here because Martha can't carry the weight. She thought playing house came with a trust fund. Now the money's gone and reality's biting. His expression shifted. You can't be this heartless. He's still your son. I leaned back in my chair. And when he disowned me, he did it with no hesitation. Now that things are hard, suddenly I'm the safety net again? He's an adult. I don't owe him anything. Greg went quiet for a beat. Then came the bitterness. That company, we built it together. I was there. I raised an eyebrow. For what? A few weeks. You bailed, Greg. 10 years without income. While I was keeping us afloat, you were asleep on a therapy bed and Martha was watching soap operas on the couch. Greg slammed his hand on the table and stood. So what, do you want us to starve? I stood too, still calm. Whether you starve or not isn't my concern anymore. I'm not your crutch. If you care about Leo so much, maybe it's time you found a second job. Instead of crawling back here with your hand out. I picked up my purse and walked away. He didn't follow. Just sank back into his chair, looking 10 years older than when he arrived. Because he wasn't afraid I'd abandon Leo. He was afraid that without me, none of them could hold Leo up. And maybe that was the fear that kept him up at night. I thought I had already cut clean. Until Greg's mother, Rolla, showed up unannounced in the lobby of my office. The front desk buzzed my line. Miss Thompson, there's an older woman downstairs. She says she's your ex-husband's mother. She insists on seeing you. I paused. Then said, let her in. She came in wearing a faded coat, hair pulled tight and neat, but her face was tired, drawn with worry. Jane, she said, barely sitting before launching into it. Greg's in bad shape. Every day worse than the last. Leo's lost weight. Barely talks anymore. You're a mother. How can you be this cold? I didn't respond. Just handed her a cup of tea. I heard they moved. She nodded, eyes watery. They're living rough. Martha's stocking shelves at a grocery store. Greg won't go to the hospital, says it's too expensive. I'm just an old woman, Jane. I can't help them. That's why I'm here. I thought of the email Greg sent me, his desperate plea for $10,000 a month, and smiled slightly. They disowned me, remember? I said. She faltered. The forced smile on her face cracked. But she quickly covered. Leo didn't mean it. It was heat of the moment stuff. He's your son. Greg, he was your husband. Ex-husband, I corrected. Her smile froze. So, your family. You can't just watch them suffer. Greg's medications, he's using cheap substitutes now, ones Martha's friends can get under the table. She reached into her bag and unfolded a piece of paper, laying it on my desk like a final plea. This is last month's medical bill. Just take a look. Maybe there's something you can do. I looked down at the paper and nodded. I'll take a look. She let out a shaky breath, thanked me repeatedly and left. But I kept staring at that list long after she was gone. It wasn't the amount that caught my eye. It was the unfamiliar names of the medications. That night, I pulled Greg's official treatment plan from years ago and compared it line by line. Some of the drugs didn't match. At all. Something was off. I didn't call Rolla back. Instead, I dialed Megan. She manages my procurement team, but more importantly, she's a close friend. And her sister works in the billing department at City Medical. I need a favor, I said. I need you to help me look up a patient's recent records. Hospital visits, prescriptions, payments. Everything. She didn't ask why. Who are we talking about, she said. Greg and Martha. I have a feeling someone's been playing games with the money. She answered without hesitation. Give me a day. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, staring up at the ceiling light. It was never about the 10 grand. It was about the fact that they were still using illness and the child to manipulate me. That same tired card, played once again to bind me into guilt. The next afternoon, Megan sent me a message. Jane. You need to see this in person. When I got to her office, she had the paperwork laid out in perfect rows. Hospital billing records, internal logs, flagged notes. Greg did come to the hospital, she said, flipping the first page. But he only had 2 basic visits. The total was under $300. She pointed to a red box on another sheet. But the receipt you got showed almost $4,000 in drug expenses. Half of those. She tapped the chart. Were sourced off the record through private channels. Filed under Martha's name. I kept my voice steady. What does that mean? Megan's expression darkened. She dropped her voice. It means someone is trafficking prescription meds. I stared at the list. My fingers tightened slightly on the table's edge. That's not the worst of it, she went on. She's been exchanging part of the meds for cheaper generics, off the books, and giving those to Greg instead. I closed my eyes for a beat. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was systematic exploitation. Skimming healthcare costs and gambling with Greg's actual condition, for profit. You going to the police? I didn't answer immediately. I slid all the files into a folder and zipped it shut. Not yet. I need more. But eventually. I want to hear it from her. I want her to say out loud whose money she took, and whose life she played with. When I walked out of the hospital, the sky was impossibly blue, the sunlight almost too hot on my face. For years I'd been building a house. Not a physical one. A life. A structure that others lived in comfortably while I served as the heating system, the plumbing, the unseen labor behind the scenes. I realized finally, this house needs to come down. And when it does, I'm not leaving a single steel beam behind. I didn't want to wait around for a months-long investigation. And I certainly didn't want Leo catching wind of it before I was ready. So I asked to see Martha. Alone. I called her directly, asked if she could meet me at a downtown cafe. She agreed, on time as always, dressed in her signature beige knit cardigan, makeup polished and tasteful. She still looked the part, the dutiful caretaker, the image of soft-spoken competence. You'd never guess she was neck-deep in fraud, deception, and identity theft. Martha, I nodded politely. Have a seat. She settled across from me. I casually flipped my phone screen face down. The recording had started the moment she sat. She looked cautious, maybe thinking I was here to argue over Greg's medical bills. She began with her usual soft-spoken preamble. I know you're still upset with Leo. He didn't mean everything he said. He's just a kid, Jane. Things have been hard lately and we're not trying to rely on you, it's just. I cut her off and slid the folder across the table. I've been cleaning up some of my financial records, I said, flipping a few copies like I wasn't really invested. Some charges didn't make sense. I figured we should talk face to face. Clear up any misunderstandings. Her fingers froze as she opened the folder. Her face changed instantly. I think you might be mistaken, she said with a weak smile. I only follow Greg's instructions. I'm just the caregiver. You know that. Caregiver. I echoed with a faint smile of my own. You were listed as a co-signer on our bank accounts. You submitted 2 reimbursement forms using my name as the legal guardian. Martha, I'd love to know, how exactly did you get access to those documents? Her hand twitched. She hadn't expected me to be that direct. Greg told me to handle it, she said, glancing toward the window. I was just trying to keep things running smoothly at home. Using the long-term care benefits on my Social Security account? $5,000 a month. She gave a low chuckle. You always were the accounting type. I didn't blink. The silence grew. She finally dropped the smile. Her voice changed, cooler, sharper. Let's be honest. You've always hated that I understand Greg better than you do. That I know how to take care of him. That I know how this house works. I let out a small laugh. Not because she was right, but because she thought that was the win. Understanding, I said softly, doesn't make what you did legal. Her face twitched. The confidence faltered. I had a pharmacist go through every drug you ordered, I continued. It cost me $1,000. 3 of those were sleep medications. 1 was for chronic arthritis. Greg doesn't have either condition. She licked her lips, dry now. He hasn't been sleeping. Where did the meds go, Martha? I asked, ice in my voice. She didn't answer. Because the truth didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to the evidence. And soon it would belong to the court. So what did you bring me here for? Martha asked, her voice dropping just slightly, laced with a hint of challenge. To rehash old drama? Or are we negotiating something? I didn't flinch. I just want to hear it from you, I said quietly. How much money have you taken from Greg, over all these years? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned my face like she was trying to calculate how much I already knew. Then she gave a little shrug. Fine. Since you want honesty. Her tone was light, even casual. Ever since his stroke, I've handled everything, his meds, his therapy, his meals. I've kept him steady, kept him from falling apart. I took care of the forms, the meetings, the lies that covered up your absence. She leaned in, dropping her voice to a whisper like we were swapping secrets, not stacking evidence. I pulled money from his accounts, sure. But that was earned. He told me I deserved it. Said you were all paycheck, no heart. That what he needed was someone real beside him. Her nails tapped the table, rhythmic, mocking. You thought your long hours were noble, but he built a new home right under you. All I did was manage it better. I didn't argue. I simply nodded slowly and placed my hand on my purse. Then I stood up, looked her straight in the eye and smiled. Thank you for your honesty, Martha. You gave me exactly what I needed today. Her face froze. Something in her expression flickered. What do you mean? I turned away and said quietly, I mean the truth, when spoken aloud, can be worth a lot more than a lie. And I walked out of that cafe into the bright sun, the air rich with roasted coffee and caramel. I didn't look back. I already knew she'd rush to cover her tracks. Maybe she'd run to Leo and cry that I was delusional, unstable, cruel. What she didn't know was that a backup copy of the recording was already in my attorney's hands. He had never seen me as a threat. But I wasn't the woman who used to shuffle between the kitchen and the boardroom, trying to earn love with casseroles and contracts. Not anymore. She thought I was still the woman who would trade everything for peace at the dinner table. He was wrong. The recorder in my purse was still running, but I knew I had all I needed. It was enough. More than enough. I didn't go home after the cafe. I took a cab straight to my attorney's office. Not the old-school man who handled our family trust, but the firm Diana had recommended. Young, sharp, unapologetically fierce and focused on women's rights. We received the audio copy you mailed in, Kelly said as she put on her headset. But it's good you're here in person. I've got a few details I want to clarify. I nodded and sat, hands folded on my lap. I don't want to wait. I want to sue her, Martha. And Greg too, if any of the paperwork has his signature on it. Kelly set the headphones down and gave me a long look. You should know, they'll likely come after your mental fitness. Try to paint you as emotionally unstable. They'll want the court to believe you're not capable of managing family finances. They might even try to revoke your role in the trust. I know, I said calmly. That's why I came to you. I'm not looking to survive this quietly. I'm looking to win. She smiled. Then let's get to work. For the next few days I turned myself into a one-woman legal task force. I combed through years of bank statements, printed emails, Greg's property transfers, Martha's benefit claims. I highlighted, flagged, cross-referenced. I knew exactly how to dismantle a mess. I'd done it 100 times for my company. This time I was applying every ounce of skill to my own life. This time I was the project. And the outcome? Take back what was mine. Clear out those who tried to climb on my back to rise. A few days later Kelly called. The transcript from the recording is complete. It's more than enough to file civil charges for financial fraud. We can also notify the Department of Human Services regarding the benefits abuse. Are you ready to proceed? I turned to look at the drawing still hanging on the wall. Leo's sketch from when he was 12. Greg in the kitchen baking a pizza, me in the corner smiling at them both. I stood up, pulled it down and dropped it into a cardboard box. I'm ready, I said. And I'm not waiting for them to come to me. I want them blindsided. 4 days after the lawsuit was filed my phone rang. Leo. His voice was familiar but colder than I remembered. Have you lost your mind, Mom? I leaned back on the sofa. You'll have to be more specific. You're suing Martha. You know this will destroy Dad, right? He can't handle court proceedings. I closed my eyes, fighting the sting behind them. I could have gone to the police. I didn't. I chose the legal route. Transparent. Civil. Silence. Then, what do you even want? I gave a quiet laugh. You've all said for years that I only care about money. So that's where I'm starting, by reclaiming everything I paid for. He hung up. I didn't cry. Instead I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept all the things I hoped I'd never need. At the bottom was our prenuptial agreement. There in a tucked-away clause it stated, if one party commits fraud or conceals major medical decisions, the other reserves the right to rescind joint asset agreements. I had signed it once out of fear. Now it was my weapon. That night I slept better than I had in years. At dawn the next morning, Diana knocked on my front door holding a newspaper in one hand. Have you seen this? She asked, laying the Morning Gazette flat on my kitchen table. There, tucked in the bottom right corner of the front page, was a brief, easily overlooked story. Private caregiver under investigation for identity theft and benefits fraud. Police confirm active case. Diana glanced at me with the faintest glint of satisfaction in her eyes. Looks like she knows now. You're not the pushover she thought you were. I smiled. No, I said quietly. Now the real war begins. I sat in my car gripping the duplicate letter I'd just picked up from Kelly's office. Martha's good days were officially over. Kelly's team had worked fast. The moment I handed over the recording, they secured all evidence, archived every record and initiated the filing process. I signed the necessary affidavits and for the first time, told the entire story from the beginning. Greg's illness. The changes to our finances. Leo's betrayal. And the rot hiding behind Martha's perfectly styled hair and nurturing facade. I thought I'd break down while recounting it all. I didn't. I was calm. Detached. No tears. No trembling voice. Just facts. Maybe that was because the real grief had already been spent, on the night of the graduation party when something inside me died quietly. In the meeting room, Kelly flipped through documents, her tone crisp and focused. We're filing civil charges, at least 3 counts of fraud. Possibly identity theft. She used your name on multiple documents. I nodded. I'm all in. She looked up, eyes steady. You realize this won't be quick. If she panics, she'll try everything she can to twist it. Including turning it back on you. I gave a dry little smile. They've already started. I slid my phone across the table. A few texts from Leo glowed on the screen. You've gone too far, Mom. I don't understand why you're doing this. Can't we all just live our own lives in peace? Kelly read them, then raised a brow. So now he's playing the victim. Classic Leo, I said, shrugging. When he doesn't get his way, he performs the pain. The only difference this time, I paused, is that I'm not performing with him. Just then another message came through. From Lana, Greg's sister, Leo's aunt. Someone who rarely reached out. Heard you're going after Martha. Are you okay? Leo's been a wreck lately. Maybe we could grab tea? I stared at it for a few seconds, then flipped my phone screen down. Kelly asked, "You planning to respond?" I smiled. Not yet. Let them stew a while. We turned back to the files. Kelly's paralegal had uncovered something new. The power of attorney update Greg allegedly signed, naming Martha as decision-maker, had never gone through proper legal channels. No doctor's signature. No legal witness. No notary, Kelly said, holding up the original. This document's worthless in court. If he signed it under prolonged medication influence, we could add criminal liability. Could she go to prison? I asked. No guarantees, Kelly replied. But she'll never touch another penny from your family again. I closed my eyes, let out a long breath. I had been holding that in for years. That night, just as I hung up my coat, the doorbell rang. It was late. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, Diana. She was holding a cake box, looking cautiously hopeful. You're here. I opened the door, surprised. She lifted the box. Figured you probably skipped dinner. Thought I'd bring something sweet. I stood there for a beat. Then, without a word, stepped aside to let her in. We sat in the kitchen just like we had 100 nights before. She sliced the cake, made the tea, and let the silence settle over us first, filling the space where grief and fury had lived too long. Finally, she asked, "You're really taking them to court?" I nodded. They didn't leave me a choice. She didn't argue. Didn't lecture. Just topped off my cup with more hot water. Then don't you dare go soft. I stared into the glass, murmuring, kindness is for people who've earned it. Greg hasn't. As for Leo, I'm giving him one last chance. But that doesn't mean I'll abandon myself. She didn't answer. Just sat beside me, silent and steady. The morning of the trial. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands wrapped around a cup of still warm coffee. The courtroom was small. 3 rows for public seating, blinds casting stripes of sunlight across the floor. Greg had been hospitalized for nearly a month. Before that, Kelly helped finalize the divorce paperwork. No drama, no screaming, just a pen that barely had enough ink left to sign. We closed all joint accounts, froze insurance transfers tied to Martha, and locked down my assets. Greg, too weak to appear in court, had signed a voluntary dissolution of marriage in the presence of a doctor and attorney. Now it was Martha Holland standing on the other side. Does the defendant understand the charges being brought against her? The judge asked. Martha didn't look at me. She nodded. No makeup today. Her gray sweater looked worn thin. She could have been any woman on any street. But I wasn't fooled. Kelly stood, her voice firm as she presented the evidence. We submit records of unauthorized account changes, pharmaceutical purchase orders, falsified subsidy applications, and a recording in which the defendant admits to the actions under question. When the tape played, it was as if the air froze over. Martha's voice filled the courtroom, soft, measured, disturbingly calm. Of course I used his money. That was my payment. You think I was doing this for love? For family? The verdict was clear. The court ruled that Martha had engaged in financial misconduct and identity fraud. She was ordered to repay all confirmed stolen funds, and would face criminal charges pending further investigation. I didn't look at her. I was watching Leo. Leo sat in the gallery, pale and motionless, his hands clasped tightly together. He didn't move, didn't blink, as if frozen into the moment, carved into stillness. It wasn't until Martha, under repeated questioning, finally admitted to manipulating Greg's compromised mental state to change parts of the financial authorizations, that something in Leo cracked. His eyes reddened. He wasn't wearing the mock turtleneck sweaters Martha had always picked for him. Instead, he'd pulled on his old college jacket, faded but clean. And in that moment, he looked like a young man who had finally stepped out of the fog, disoriented, standing in the heart of the truth, not sure whom to blame or even where to begin. The final judgment wasn't harsh. Martha was ordered to repay $120,000 in misappropriated funds and sentenced to 18 months of community correction. But it wasn't the sentence that broke Leo. It was the collapse of everything he thought was home. I didn't stay to see them leave the courtroom. Instead, Kelly and I moved on to finalize the last piece of my own chapter. My divorce from Greg was now officially filed and processed. Under our prenup, I retained my original capital and all individual income streams. The assets acquired during the marriage, Greg's portfolio gains, the coastal house, several trust accounts, and a portion of his retirement fund, were split according to agreement. I kept the old house. And from my share, I established a new trust to fund care resources for patients with Parkinson's disease. That night when I got home, Diana was already waiting in my living room. She sat with a cup of red tea, eyes gentle but lit with something quietly fierce. "You won," she said. Then she added with a half-smile, "Even your revenge was elegant." I set my bag down, allowed myself a small laugh. "I didn't win. I just stopped running." She nodded, then paused. "Leo came by," she said. "Said he wants to apologize. In person." I didn't answer right away. "Do you want to see him?" she asked. I shook my head. Then nodded. Then finally said, "Not yet." A few days later I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was folded by hand, neatly, carefully. Inside the note was brief. "I've returned the check that was meant for me. I found a part-time job. It's just enough to get by. Thank you for everything you did, for all the years I didn't see it. I'm sorry I didn't open my eyes sooner. If you ever decide you're ready, I'd like a chance to introduce myself to you properly. As your son, Leo." I didn't write back. But I felt something settle quietly inside me, something that had been restless for far too long. It wasn't that I couldn't forgive him. It was that, for the first time, I understood. Not every mother is meant to sacrifice herself endlessly for a child who won't reach back. Some mothers are meant to live for themselves. There is no perfect closure in life. No clean final chapter where the page folds itself neatly shut. But somewhere, on one page or another, the story does get to say, "This is where I end it. And this is where I begin again."